Okay, so this is the second half of the causes of World War II. Let's continue.
I always start the American story of World War II in Europe because, you know, Hitler. So I'm going to start in the Pacific, where until 1944 there were actually more American personnel deployed than in Europe. Things didn't...
Okay, so understand that we fought in three different continents: Africa, Europe, and also Asia. But the majority of the fighting were done in islands in the Pacific. So people just refer to it as the Pacific. Okay? Now, understand the Marine Corps was used in the Pacific against the Japanese. The Army was used in Europe and Africa against the Nazis and the Italians. But the Italians are sissy boys, so they're not really important. Okay? Anyway, so they're going to focus on the Pacific.
Let's start well in the Pacific. Let's go to the thought bubble. Perhaps worse than Pearl Harbor was the surrender of 78,000 American and Filipino troops at Bataan. This was the largest surrender by American troops in history, and it resulted in thousands dying on the Bataan Death March to prisoner of war camps, where thousands more would die. But in May...
Okay, the Battle of Bataan, or the Bataan Death March, okay, the Japanese, they had a surprise attack on the Americans. The Americans had bases, they had American troops in the Philippines that we had. Remember, we got the Philippines, we got a base there during the Spanish-American War because it used to belong to the Spanish, okay? So those troops aren't very well supplied. It's kind of there just holding ground, you know, just kind of like holding your spot in line. You understand what I'm saying? Like, hey, I'm going to go to the restroom quick, will you hold my spot in line? That's pretty much what that force in the Philippines were. Not a very big force. So the Japanese go overpower it, and 78,000, I believe is what they said, but I don't know how, the number's not important, but chingos of American soldiers are going to surrender. I've read a book about the Bataan Death March that I had to do for military history in college, and it's my opinion that the Japanese obviously didn't care for them. The Japanese are very, 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 very proud people and would rather commit suicide than surrender. And so they pretty much kill a lot of American prisoners. But with the Bataan Death March, they would march them 10 miles this way, turn around, march them 8 miles back. Turn around, march them 20 miles that way again, turn around, march them 13 miles back. And this was done over and over and over without water or food, and people were literally dropping dead. Or they were going too slow, and the Japanese would kill them. Okay? And so a few of them survived, but the majority of them died. That was the Bataan Death March.
In 1942, we protected Australia from the Japanese fleet by winning the Battle of the Coral Sea, and then in June we won a huge victory at Midway Island, midway between Hawaii and Japan, I guess, and probably named by historians.
Okay, the Battle of Midway is the most important naval battle you need to understand. It's the only naval battle. When I say naval, I'm talking about ships in the water. It's the only naval battle you need to know. It's the Battle of Midway. Now, the Japanese are going to attack this island. That island, because that island had a runway to land planes on. If you can land planes on a place, you can use it as a storage facility. You can build warehouses and stuff on there and keep all your weapons so that you can deploy them faster to the war zone. Okay, the Japanese wanted to take control of this for their use. But we intercepted their communications, and we knew where they were going to go and when they were going to be there. The Japanese were planning an assault on the Americans. Okay? I'm not a naval historian or a naval warfare tactics, but I understand what an ambush is. And basically what the Americans do is ambush the Japanese as they're heading to Midway. And so let me just kind of show it here. All right, let's say right here. Boom. Damn it. There we go. So let's say that this is Midway, that the Japanese were going to attack it. So when you're traveling with your fleet, you look like a giant spear. It's long, okay? And the most important ships, like the battleships that have the big guns, are protected because they don't have short-range weapons. So it's like a rifle. If you have a rifle with a scope, I can run up close to you with a knife and stab you. That makes sense? Okay? And so they're vulnerable, but because they're in a long spear, the Americans ambush them, which is a surprise attack from its side, and pretty much destroy the entire Japanese naval fleet, which is what they tried to do to us at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, which is why we got into the war. Okay? And so that was the only naval battle. You need to remember the Battle of Midway. America defeats the Japanese. We win.
Between Hawaii and Japan, I guess, and probably named by historians. The U.S. strategy in the Pacific has been called island hopping, and it involved taking Japanese-controlled islands one at a time to be used as bases for bombers that could then be used against Japan itself. It was a slow process, and the fighting over these jungly South Pacific islands was fierce and extraordinarily costly. The battle at Guadalcanal went from August 1942 to February 1943, and they didn't freeze like in Stalingrad, but conditions weren't much better. And now let's...
Okay, so island hopping. Japan is an archipelago, which means it's a group of islands. But there's the main body of Japan, and that's where, Tokyo is. That's where the majority of people are. But there are bastante de islands that are smaller. And on these islands, there are Japanese troops. Okay? So what America's plan is, and it's created by a guy named Douglas MacArthur. He's important. He's going to come back during the Korean War later. But Douglas MacArthur is the jefe in the Pacific. He's an army general, but he's commanding all of the personnel there, okay? So, he wants to bomb Tokyo. He wants to bomb and make them surrender, okay? Now, bombers can only carry so much fuel and so much bombs. And so, if I'm throwing rocks at you and you're over there by stripes, the closer I get, I'm able to actually start those rocks maybe being able to hit you, okay? And so we would fight. The process would be this. The Navy would pull up and just bombard the islands, okay? Pound it with very, very heavy and powerful bombs for 2 or 3 days. Then the Marines would go in and clear it out. And once the Americans controlled that island, the engineers would come in, build a runway, put up a fuel tank, and they would go and be able to bomb further. And so they were able to get closer and closer until we're finally able to get to Japan and drop the bomb that's going to end the war, the atomic bomb.
To the European theater. We call this the European War because we were fighting against Europeans, and it ended in Europe, but the first U.S.
Okay. So remember, the Army is fighting in Europe and Africa. The Marine Corps and the Navy in the Pacific. Okay? General Eisenhower is the supreme Allied commander. I showed you him shaking hands with Patton in the last video. Okay? But the first place we're going to fight is going to be in North Africa.
Troops to fight against Nazis actually did so in North Africa, so it's kind of a misnomer. American weaponry was pretty poor, but after our initial invasion in North Africa in November 1942, we got into it, and by 1943, we and the British defeated Rommel in the desert, and we were ready to invade Europe, which should have made Stalin happy, because up to this point, Russians had been doing the bulk of the dying in the war.
Okay, he mentioned Rommel. Rommel is if there was one German general, if there was one German person you knew besides Adolf Hitler, it should be Erwin Rommel. He was a tank commander for the Nazis. He was doing hella work. He was doing very good stuff. He was very successful in North Africa. But once the Americans joined forces with the British, we defeat him. Okay? And so Rommel was a German tank commander. So once we get rid of Africa, we're going to go to another country in Europe that is also a part of the Axis powers, and that's Italy. Because remember in the last video we showed how Italy invaded Ethiopia. Italy is led by a dude named Benito Mussolini. He's down with Hitler and Japan. So we're going to jump across the Mediterranean Sea really quick, and beat the Italians. But out of all three bad guys, the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese, the Italians are the sissiest of all three.
Stalin wasn't happy, first because he was a mean and nasty person, and those kinds of people are rarely happy, and secondly because rather than invading France and striking at Germany more directly, the Allies invaded Sicily and Italy, where we fought for most of 1943 and much of 1944 until...
Okay, so Stalin, who's this dude, who's actually our ally right now, is fighting against the Nazis there. The Nazis are a lot better trained, they have a lot better equipment, but the Soviets, okay, because they're not the Russians right now, they're the Soviets, have more men. And because they have more men, they're more successful. And they're actually the reason that if anyone won the war, okay, World War II, it's the Russians. Okay? All right? If they were a team, if the Allies were a team that were holding up the trophy in the parade afterwards, the Soviet Union would be their star player because they gave so many civilians, I think something like 40 million civilians died in Russia. Civilians are just regular people. They lost the majority of soldiers and they killed the majority of the Nazis. And so Stalin wants them to invade France. Okay? When are they going to invade France? What's that day called? Remember? D-Day on June 6th. 1944, and it should be coming up here in a little bit.
1944, until finally, on June 6th, we joined some Brits and Canadians in invading Normandy on D-Day.
Okay, the night before D-Day, we're at technically D-Day, early in the morning, members of the 101st and 82nd Airborne units are going to be dropped deep into France behind German lines to knock out German guns. That's what they're showing right there.
And that was the beginning of the end for the Nazis. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Oh.
Okay, this video did not show the actual anything about D-Day, so I'm going to pause here and show you a clip. Actually, I want to make a video with more time so I can talk more about D-Day, and so I'm going to stop this video here. But in this video, we talked about the Battle of Midway, island hopping, we talked about us fighting in in Africa, and so we will pick up in a little bit.